If anxiety is the undercurrent fueling your obsessive pursuit of excellence, then today's conversation is for you. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Michael T. Lardon, who's a board-certified psychiatrist and one of the pioneers in applying clinical psychiatry to elite sports performance. He's worked with Olympic athletes, professional golfers, and high-performing competitors across multiple disciplines for multiple decades. He's the author of Mastering Golf's Mental Game and Finding Your Zone, where he blends neuroscience, temperament research, emotional regulation, and disciplined focus into practical frameworks for sustained peak performance. And we're going to dig deep today into the topic of performance anxiety, understanding why and how your experience of anxiety and fear can remain acute or even become chronic, and what to do about it. We're going to talk about the difference between sports psychology and sports psychiatry, and ultimately how Dr. Lardon's unique experience and education allows him to approach performance in a results-driven world through his own unique lens. This is a fun, multifaceted conversation that I know you're going to get immense value out of. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you add both of the books that Dr. Lardon has written that I mentioned into your Amazon cart and hit that purchase button. There are two phenomenal reads that will give you multiple nuggets to apply both on and off the course. And a quick reminder, the 90-day Golf Identity Upgrade Accelerator, it's live. A lot of great feedback already coming in. There's a massive difference when you start prioritizing the deep, necessary work to unlearn the pattern of thinking, feeling, believing, and behaving that is keeping you stuck and holding you back from your potential. If you're interested in the 90-day Golf Identity Upgrade Accelerator, shoot me a DM with the words Identity Upgrade on Instagram at the Paul Salter, and we'll have a conversation. Without further ado, let's dive in to today's show. Dr. Lardon, you sit at the intersection of psychiatry and performance. Now, I'm being very intentional here and enunciating because a lot of my listeners are very well versed in sports psychology, routines, visualization, confidence, but very few understand the difference between sports psychology and sports psychiatry. Can you help really begin to lay a foundation for us differentiating the two?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think it might be instructive to explain my trajectory. And that was as a young person, I was fascinated in sports. I was an athlete. Had some phenomena where time slowed down, got in the zone, so to speak. And I always became fascinated with mind states, consciousness, and performance since a very young age. Fast forward, in college, I had the opportunity to really study with some amazing people at Stanford, and I continued to look at that phenomenon from many, many standpoints, electrophysiologic, medical standpoint. I took a little hiatus and went to medical school. And then when I came out, I did regular internal medicine, but I did a residency in psychiatry. It happened so that around that time, my brother got a PGA Tour card. And I got involved with the Olympics, first as a, let's say, sport psychiatrist, where people were having anxiety and panic and things like that. But I was always very interested in the other side of the curve, so to speak. So I didn't say to myself, let's be a sports psychiatrist. I said, okay, well, I could be a doctor. That'd be fun. And then I'll continue my passion, which is in sports and probably nowadays most in golf. but I think a good way to think about it is a continuum. So if we think
Mm-hmm.
of a rainbow, and over here is being in the zone where time slows down and you shoot 59 and everything's perfect. And I just want to make a sidebar. I remember when David Duval shot 59 in the desert. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's probably the second after Al Geiberger. One of the reporters asked him, well, sort of minimizing his accomplishment. The rough is low out here in the desert. And I remember Duval said, when you shoot 59, you don't hit it in the rough, which is true. So he was in the zone.
Yeah.
But most people, it's very hard to get in the zone when you want. And I see, Paul, you do hypnosis and that ties into the zone. So if you want to go there, we can later. But people are, we're not static. We change in our life. We can have anxiety, we can have personal problems. So if we think of this continuum, we think of the zone over here. We think most of us are somewhere in the middle. Sometimes we're anxious, sometimes we're not happy. And then over here, we could have some tragedy in our life, or we could have, some genetic problem, and we could be clinically depressed or clinically anxious. So even in my non-sports life, I'm always thinking, let's take people from, if they have clinical anxiety or depression or what have you, let's not only get them back to here, but let's see if we can't help them in life. And so I think of myself very much as a performance coach. So here on my couch, like a psychiatrist have, I don't really talk that much about, your mother and that. I would say, and I don't lie people down on the couch. I just talk to them. And once we get you feeling better, then we talk about your life and your goals and how can we help you professionally. And that piece is not all that much different in terms of what I do with athletes. So there are many sports. Golf is not one because I grew up in golf. My brother played on tour. But there are sports like I help show jumpers and don't tell anybody in the
Hmm.
show jumping world, but I'm actually afraid of horses. Uh, but what happened is some years ago, one of the show jumpers read, I think, my first book. I helped them. They did well. Fast forward, Olympic teams, things like that, because really the concepts are very similar
Mhm.
whatever sports we're talking about. So sports psychiatry, I think when I first came out on tour, people, oh God, he only gives medicines. But that
Yeah.
that I don't like to be defined like that. And I would say the majority of the folks I help, we don't use medicines. Okay. So, that's for starters. Um, and, nowadays I think that differentiation's not so big because there are a lot of sports psychologists and most of what I do is sports psychology, but sometimes I do more.
Yeah. Well said. And I think you just have such a unique additive lens to apply through the lens of psychology and performance, having the psychiatry background. Can you help our listeners understand, like anxiety? It's such a buzzword. We're going to filter through the lens of performance anxiety. And whether that's the golfer on the first tee, the winning putt on the 18th green, or even the entrepreneur listening who's trying to go and grow within their business from a biological perspective, from a nervous system lens, excuse me, help us understand what's happening internally when anxiety is chronically present.
Well, I mean, first, it would be important to define anxiety, and there are
Hmm.
probably several definitions. So, probably one of the most common are to look at physiologic correlates. What does that fancy word mean? It means our heart rate's going fast, our throat is dry, right? Sometimes we can feel our heart pounding. Emotionally, we might feel fear and want to be out of this situation. Cognitively, we might be worrying a lot. Okay. So you have how you're thinking. I'm worried. How you're feeling. I feel fear. Physiologically, you're all activated.
Hmm.
So that is a normal physiologic response to danger, right? I have this one slide in one of my talks. where the slide comes up and there's a wave. Of course, I live here in San Diego, and in that wave, there's this giant, looks like a killer shark, and in the curl of the wave, and right next to the shark is a guy on a surfboard, right? So when we put that slide up and it says fear underneath, everybody can relate, right? I mean, oh my gosh. Then we do the next slide and we point out that there's this extra dorsal fin, and I'm not the expert on this, but it says it's not a white shark, it's a large porpoise, right? Which of course everybody is, you're not so worried that that animal's going to attack you. So you go from fear to anxious, right? I'm a little anxious. And one of the things in helping people deal with uh, anxiety and performance is that uh, biologically we've evolved for this fear response to help ourselves, right? Survival. But that nowadays, because of sociobiology, our culture, we sometimes get that fear response like we're in danger, and we're really not. We're just playing a sport. And what'll happen is anxiety will bleed into fear. So we first reframe it. We say, the worst is you make double bogey, you go home, your kid hugs you. All right. So nobody's dying out here. Now, the exception is that I helped some NASCAR drivers, and I couldn't really say that, okay, because that was very dangerous. But one is to reframe it, and that in and of itself helps. Now, there are people that have pathologic anxiety, where they have panic attack in a store. There are PGA Tour players, renowned players, which have had real panic attacks on the golf course. And, the media doesn't talk too much about it, but if you read through the lines, you can see, well, maybe that was what was going on, and it can happen to you and I. So if that happens, we try to figure that out and we try to treat that appropriately so they're not having, panic attacks in the middle of nothing. And then the performance side of it is, how do you deal with the pressure?
Is anxiety learned in your experience?
Well, I don't know about learned. I mean, biologically, the fear response is, in our genome, right? Now, what happens is everybody is a little bit different. I have a dear friend from college, Eric Hayden. He won 5 gold medals in the 1980 Olympics. And I just want to have a sidebar. If you watch the Olympics, they always have him and Snoop Doggy Dogg this last week with the speed skating. So Eric won those in speed skating. And we used to joke in college, we would have chemistry tests or what have you, and we'd all be pretty nervous. And I swear that guy's pulse never went above 60. And that was the joke. So when he was competing in front of millions and millions of people, he's not someone physiologically being very reactive. So that's a real advantage for performance. But, the flip side is there are many great performers. I think Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, the two famous actors, I think they both have social anxiety disorder, and they're actors. So, everybody's built a little different. And do I think you learn that? I mean, you can if there's trauma. And that's what in golf we'll say we have some scar tissue, right? Scott Hoke. Now, I know the audience is young, but he missed an 18-inch putt to win the Masters some 30 years ago. He probably has a little scar tissue from that. And so that might be some learned anxiety, if you will.
Yeah, a really good answer. So I'm curious, coming back to that word pressure, or even the perception of pressure, for the audience member listening who is self-diagnosed with performance anxiety on the course, in their professional life, what are some of the low-hanging fruit steps they can begin to take to not only understand, but begin to diffuse that anxiety when it shows up?
Again, let me just take a step back and then answer your question. So we talked about the physiology of anxiety. Another way to think of anxiety is what we call a gestalt conceptualization. And that's what this means. So I'm right here with you, okay? And if I'm thinking about the ticket I got in my car on the way for, to work, it didn't happen. But if I am and I'm worried about it, okay, that gap between being present with you and worrying about the ticket creates anxiety. If I'm on the golf course
Mm.
and I need to make two birdies to make the cut, and I'm not focusing on the shot, and I'm worried about these two birdies, the gap between the here and now, whether it's the past or the present, that creates anxiety. So if I can be fully present, there is no anxiety, if you will. Now,
Yeah.
not an easy thing to do. Like we always say, where should my mind be? And it should be in the gap between two thoughts. Now, that's not an easy
Oh.
place to be. And that brings
Mhm.
us to what goes on in the zone. And this thing, a fancy word is observing ego. Like it's almost as if you go to the theater and you're in the theater and you're sitting back and that big old movie comes up and you're just observing it, right? And you're not making judgment. You're not really doing anything except being present. When we have these peak performance, we're just really present, observing the phenomenon and not evaluating it. I got a little lost there. What was the original question?
Well, that's so helpful. I'm going to piggyback off of that and we'll inevitably circle up. Like, I hear time traveling, and we all have that propensity to time travel to the future, to the past. I'm curious, in your experience working with high level athletes and successful individuals, how do you begin to help them develop the tools to ground into the present moment, to prevent them from thinking about those last two birdies they, quote, need to make to perform well or win the tournament?
Well, first there has to be some conceptual framework, and meaning this: if let's take the example you want to pass a test,
Mm-hmm.
okay? I have a son and a daughter, and my son doesn't do a lot of homework, but he'll say, "Oh gosh, I got to get an A on the test or a B plus or something." And inevitably, that probably doesn't happen. Uh, and my daughter, who works very hard, she's able to, make the good grades. Now, my son's very smart. So, but the point I'm making is it's not about the grade. If you want the good grade, you don't think, oh, I'm going to make the good grade. What you think about is this is the material in front of me and I need to
Mm-hmm.
master it. And if I do that,
Mm.
that translates into a good grade. So if you want to win the US Open, right? Well, you got to shoot par over 4 days on the hardest golf course. You better keep it in the fairway because the rough's this high, right? Ultimately, you can reduce it down to I have to execute each shot very well. And then that will maximize my chance to win. So that's called process oriented thinking. And what we teach the athlete, sometimes they know it, just innately. We could talk about
Mm.
Alyssa Liu today. She's the
Yeah.
Olympian that just won the gold medal. She's a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful example of talking about this. So it's very important from them to understand what a result goal and what a process goal is. So the result is win the tournament. The process goal is, well, of my 65 shots, I need to be fully engaged in that. That's where I need to keep my attention. And if I do that, I maximize my chance for my result goal, which would be to win.
Yeah. I'm
Sounds
going to
easy.
shift. Yeah, it was simple, not easy. Big difference there. On that note, speaking of Olympians, we're wrapping up the Olympics here. The closing ceremonies just concluded. One might argue that these athletes, it's necessary to be obsessed with their craft in order to perform amongst the best in the world. You've done a lot of work on this topic you define as positive obsession. Talk to us about what is positive obsession and how does it differentiate from being viewed more in this negative light of destructive obsession?
Yeah, I mean, obsession is a word that, carries a negative connotation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the obsession, let's say it is with golf, is so large that it impairs you in your personal life, your professional life, then that's an issue, and that will boomerang back to hurting your golf game. So there is
Mm.
some balance, but I think here's the point that you're probably looking at: any super high level athlete. Um, they see things at a much more sophisticated, refined level. I can remember once at the golf club that I play at, in the 18th hole, Phil Mickelson, I asked him, "What kind of shot could you hit here?" And I'd had a tour player there, I think a couple of weeks earlier, and he said, I can check it in. It was probably like an 80-yard shot, a triple tiered green, really a tricky little shot. And Phil explained to me all of these kinds of shots he could hit. So I just thought it was fascinating that he saw it this way, and this way. And, so the idea is there is an obsession with mastery. I mean, Tiger,
Mm,
of course, is famous for that. So, if you are not, I mean, I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I had a big exam every 8 years. Us doctors have to recertify on the boards. And I mean, I read the entire textbook of Mass General. I'm not bragging or anything. It's like I'm obsessional. And,
yeah.
my wife's, do you really need to do that? But it's the way that I'm built because what I want to really know about, I want to know everything. If I'm really good
Mm,
at a sport, I want to, so,
yeah.
and we tell I help the SDSU golf team this year. And I tell the young players, it all counts, meaning what you do off the course counts. What you do Friday night before Saturday counts, how you
Yeah.
conduct yourself. So if you really want to be, the Tiger Woods, it does take total dedication. And I guess in some way we can call that an obsession,
How
but
does
not
one sustain that obsession? How do they infuse what I'll just loosely call like psychological recovery to ensure that obsession can be sustained over years, decades?
passion. Passion. So if there's one thing I would think that, what do I try to help athletes with is reconnect to the passion that got them there.
Mm,
There's a woman who I helped who was a runner. She was an Olympic cross country runner. And anyhow, I helped her through injury and I helped her get back and compete at a high level. And she sent me this picture that she signed, and it's her running, and it says, "Dr. Lardon, thank you for helping me fall back in love." Right. And
mm.
my wife saw the picture and she's like, "What are these girls sending you these pictures?" And I had to explain that it was helping her fall back in love with running, right? So, so maybe we could talk about Alyssa Liu for a second?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so for those that don't know, Alyssa Liu won the gold medal in figure skating. And
Hmm.
and and here's the quick story. So she was a phenom when she was young, absolute phenom. Her father was, very directive, maybe a bit overbearing. And at age 16, she made the Olympic team, which is quite phenomenal, like being in the Masters when you're 16, right?
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to the father and everybody else, after the Olympics, she made a public announcement to the media that she was quitting at age 16. Over. Okay. So that's part one. Part two is she's at UCLA now, she's in college. And I think about 2 years ago, she kind of did a little skating and she loved it. And I think that sort of stayed with her. And then she said to herself, "I'll go skate." And she called her father, and I might have it a little wrong, but basically, and said, "I'm going to go back and skate, but you can't be involved. I don't want you involved.
Mm,
I want to skate for myself. I don't want to skate for medals or media or sponsors." And she took this new attitude, which is really important. If there's a point I'd like to make, if we want to be a great in anything, golf, let's take golf. We
mhm.
have to do it for ourselves. We can't do it for our parents. We can't do it for the coach. And if we start doing that, we put layers and layers of pressure on a competitive endeavor, which is already pressure filled. So, what did Alyssa Liu do? Well, how did she win the gold medal? She came back, and this is really interesting, and you can see it on YouTube or what have you. She's walking down the corridor to go onto the rink, right? It was packed for, and can she win the Olympic gold? And most people be a little nervous, right? Okay. She's high-fiving the janitorial staff. She's high-fiving the media. She gets out there, she's smiling and she skates, perfectly
Yeah.
with this incredible joy. And when she's done, and you may have to bleep this out, but she walks off and she says to the coach, she goes, "That's what I'm fucking talking about. Now that's fun." Okay? So she was so pumped up.
Yeah.
Most people, they finish and they're like, "Oh my gosh," right? They're so drained. So that was really, really an unusual thing. But it embodies this idea of, if you're having fun and being, pathologically nervous, they're not possible together, right? So if you're
Yeah.
laughing and you're having fun, now we open up the avenue of really doing good things.
Burnout, overwhelm, exhaustion, pressure, both self-implied and otherwise. I've seen it. I imagine you've seen it 10 times more across your years working with these high performers. When you're working with somebody who clearly is just burnt out, they've lost their passion, how do you begin to help them reconnect with the very why that has led them to this sport or down that path in the first place?
I mean, probably one of the first things, and this is where, sports psychology is generally, if you want to, put it in a box, is more of a skill set. Okay, how do
Mm-hmm.
we learn to meditate? How do we learn to relax? Some of the stuff you've asked me. But if you really get in there with somebody, none of us are the same. So what I do for one person is not what I do for another person.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to get the history. And I'll say, to answer your question, often it is, I'll take them back to, when did you have the most fun? What
Mm-hmm.
happened when you played your best round? Um, I mean, not to bring Phil up again, but I do remember before he won the British Open, and that was right after Scottish. uh, I was with him on a putting green, and he had seen Dave Stockton, and he had all these notes, and he was playing with different putters. And I think I asked him something like, "When did you putt best in your life?" And he said, "When I was young." And then I said, "Well, what did you do?" And he just showed me, and he just made everything. And then the next few weeks, he was having fun and he played really well. So, you find out, you try to reconnect him to that piece.
Yeah.
Um, you can reconnect him. Another example would be with Will Zalatoris. So he's
Mm-hmm.
somebody that I helped since college at Wake Forest, and when he finally got in his first masters. Now, mind you, he didn't get through the second stage of Q school. Okay, so he's fought his way, and he finally got in the masters. However, whatever mechanism that was, and the conversation on round one of the masters was, how long did you want to play in this thing? Your whole life since you were a little kid, right? Okay, when a little kid, you imagine, and I am sure, Paul, you've been to Augusta, but Augusta is an amazing place, right? It's like, the Sistine Chapel for golfers. I mean, it's not like a regular golf course. And I got it, of course, he was excited. And
Yeah.
the idea was, we use this term, you're playing on house money, meaning your whole
Mm-hmm.
life, did you ever believe that you're gonna be out here, playing in the Masters? And I think he really enjoyed it, and, first time in the Masters, he came in second because he was having a lot of fun. Now the trick is, the fifth time in the Masters when you haven't won, or Rory, right? When he finally
Mm-hmm.
won the PGA, he hadn't won it, and to do it to win the Grand Slam, so the
Yeah.
pressure can build up. So it's a little bit of an art to get the person, back to that place.
Which I appreciate you bringing up, because everybody here, and I'm going to call everyone out for listening, they love to look for the shortcuts, the cheat codes, the one size fits all strategy tool, swing thought, swing feel. And you're right. It's such a unique approach, which is why I am like a broken record on this podcast, talking about curiosity, self-awareness, continuing to get to know yourself, sit with yourself, so you develop that intimate understanding of who you are, what motivates you, what demotivates you, so that you can take whatever information you're consuming and learning and apply it through the filter of you to get the most out of it.
Yeah, yeah, because we're all unique. So,
Yeah.
different players struggle with different things. Some players, under
Sure.
the heat of the moment, they're great, they rally, and then they struggle with when they're not playing so well. Other people, are good in the grind, and then when they see their name go up the leaderboard, all of a sudden they get like this. So,
Yeah.
it's really getting in there with the athlete and saying, um like with SDSU yesterday, we had a little talk, and I was asking the individual guys in the last tournament, what did you struggle with? And
Mm-hmm.
each one of the six players struggled with something a little bit different.
Mm.
So, what is it? How do we do it? And that's maybe my medical background, which is we try to define the problem, to find some solutions and engage medicine. If you're a good doctor, you engage the patient
Yeah.
participation. And I think the same is here.
Really well said. Now, I want to come back to this passion, this fun, this attitude. But before we go there, something that's kind of been building as I've been listening to is these high performers. They're positively obsessed. There's an intensity about them. Yet we also spent the beginning of our conversation talking about anxiety. And when I think of some of the most intense athletes that I've had the pleasure of working with, sometimes they walked a very fine line between productive intensity and falling into these anxious, volatile patterns. I'm curious, how do you help athletes productively manage their intensity so that it works for them rather than against them?
Yeah, I mean, part and parcel with being a high performer is intensity.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you can have a quiet intensity. It doesn't, intensity manifests in many different
Mm.
ways. I mean, I think of Eric Heiden, who was always super laid back. He is super laid back, but after he wins 5 gold medals in the Olympics, he races in the Tour de France and throws on a medical degree. So he's a pretty intense guy. But if you meet him, he's like, "Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. Super nice." Um, so there's where you help them tease apart, where it's productive, where it's not. I mean, sometimes the best thing, and 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 again, we're going to go to Phil here. In 2008, in the book I wrote, Finding Your Zone, one of the stories we tell is right before in the final round of Augusta in the Masters. Phil's gonna tee off in, like, I don't know, 30 minutes, and they can't find him, okay? And I think Tim, his brother, was running around, and they finally got him, like, "Where's Mickelson?" Everybody else is on the green getting ready, doing the putting drills, and he was taking a nap because,
Mm.
Michaela Schifrin, the great skier, she is
Mm-hmm.
always taking a nap before she competes. If she's famous for that, and that is, when you're ready to go, maybe we just need to chill out and just rest. So you have to pulse it. You talked a little bit about burnout. I mean, golf's 5 hours. If you were going to take a 5 hour exam, you just don't, or study, you just don't go like this for 5 hours,
Yeah.
you won't be productive. So you have to learn how to kinda do this and take care of yourself.
How do you educate, empower, lead those high performers who struggle with the rest component of growth to find a way to embrace it and see it as productive to their longevity and their success?
I think what we do is I use humor a lot. So
Mm.
humor is a very good mechanism to diffuse, one, ego, which gets in people's way, but, it relaxes people. So, like, I'm thinking of a particular guy I helped, super intense and, really grinding all the time, and his challenge, right, We say, I say, have you relaxed today? What have you done? What have you done today? Have you listened to some mellow music? Um, and so it becomes a little bit of subliminal, ongoing
Huh.
joke, which the athlete starts to learn that, starts to integrate that.
Mm. I love that. Humor is literally the best medicine in so many cases. Cliche, but so true. Shifting gears here, what's prompted this, I think it's a beautiful segue into one of the core components of one of your books, is this passion, this fun, this enjoyment of the game, really serving as the catalyst for that process oriented mind and approach. When we're in that state, enjoying ourselves, having fun in our respective craft, we're able to really bring online what both you and I refer to as the creative mind. Too often we get stuck in the logical mind. We lose sight of that intuition, that creativity. Help our listeners understand not only the difference between our logical mind and our creative minds, but why it's so valuable to engage our creative minds.
Well, great question. It really is. I mean, a couple of things. I'm gonna make two little sidebars and then go there. One, there's some very interesting studies, dementia is obviously a big thing because we all live longer now, and how do we stave off dementia? And we know, doing Wordle and Scrabble, things like that, cognitive tasks help. But what we've also learned is engaging in the creative mind really helps. It helps stave off
Mm.
dementia. It creates different neural networks.
Yeah.
There's another study that has to do with golf and longevity, and it's not as much about cardiovascular exercise, but it's more about the cerebellum and balance and coordination, which
Yeah.
translates to some longevity. Now, I did get off topic, but here's the point coming back. So, I think the very best athletes, they really do use, like this example of Phil being able to hit the shot all these different ways. So
Hmm.
he's seeing something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Tiger seeing the shots a little bit different. The average golfer gets up and goes way over there, boom. Okay. In the early 90s, we did a bunch of studies at the qualifying school. I had a lot of experience out there caddying for my brother in some of them, and he was in
Yeah.
like 8 finals or whatever it was. And every time he made it, it was by a shot, and every time we missed, it was by a shot. So it's always over 6 days. But what we did learn were a couple of interesting things. One was when there was a big variance in time in the pre-shot routine, we didn't get the same results. When the
Mm.
pre-shot routine was, in terms of time and rhythm, very consistent, those players did better. And part of that is, I use this thing, mental scorecard, and we have a pre-shot pyramid, which is pretty simple. Left brain, figure out the shot. What are, the wind, the distance, all the considerations.
Hmm.
After that, right brain. Right brain's the creative brain. So some athletes like Jack Nicklaus would say, never hit a shot without have first seeing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, the right brain function is more than visual. So it'd be kinesthetic, the feeling. When Duval was playing his best, he's feeling he's holding on because he used to hit a little cut. It can be rhythmic. So there's one of the kickers in the NFL that I helped that we use a metronome, and it was a rhythm, boom, 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 right? Or there's
Mm.
a famous golfer, and I'm not gonna mention the name because I got in trouble once, gave a big talk, and on the range, right next to me, he's there, and he would say, so you'll get by his age, he'd go, "Cindy Crawford." Now, those of that you don't know, she's a famous model and she's like my age, like 65, but back in the day. So the idea was the rhythm, Cindy Crawford. Okay. And that's really, he used that like a metronome.
Yep.
Okay. So if I'm with a player, I'll try to figure out, how do you do it? Are you more rhythmic? Are you more visual? What is your creative way? And then we take that. Okay. and we package that into their pre-shot. So I figure the shot out, right? I figure it out, and then I come in and I either visualize it or I get a sense of my tempo or whatever my thing is, and then I step in no brain, okay, which is I full intention, full application. I hit the shot. Now we say no brain, KNOW. It's what we call a triple entendre, meaning KNOW is knowledge. And there's another slide I have that says, those who know, those who know do not think, and those who think do not know, right? So, and then within the KNOW, you have NOW, now, be here and now. And then, of course, NO, which is let's not be thinking about some swing thought or something. So, um, that creative function is really super important. And I do remember one of the players, I think we were in DC, and he's coming down the stretch, and it looks like, playoff maybe. It's a perfect drive, and we're on the last hole. He has a generic 9-iron, 150 yards, which for tour players is like, a 2-foot putt. Are you there? It says reconnecting. We're good? Okay, and what happened is the player got fast. Just took the club, 9-iron, boom, hit it a groove low, hit the back, went over, double bogey, and didn't go through this process. And the shot, the hole before, and here's the point of this, he had this incredibly difficult shot out of the woods. He had to carve it, and he thought about it, and he really pictured it, and he hit an amazing shot, okay? Then we have the easy shot, okay? And then all of a sudden, he doesn't use that function, rhythm changes, and then we get a different result. So that's that right brain thing.
So for those of you listening, one of your action steps, where and how can you infuse more creativity on the course, in your business? Can you slow down, pause, add in an extra opportunity, at least think through what's a different shot I can use to approach this green, and simply observe, stay curious, reflect on what happens after the fact. I love that. Now, I want to shift gears again. Something that I'm always fascinated by is the variance in how high performers talk to and about themselves. Digging into the narrative, their own story they tell themselves as they're performing or otherwise. What have you observed in all of your years working with your clients about the self-talk of those who end up becoming the most successful?
Well, I mean, I think paradoxically, the greatest athletes that I have worked with are surprisingly humble in a way. Now, they may have some swagger and some confidence,
Yeah.
but they also there's a difference between swagger and arrogance, okay? Arrogance is, "Oh, I'm the best guy," okay? And then all of a sudden you have to live up to this projected ideal. Um, I think the very best people are super curious, always wanna know more. How do I figure it out a little bit more? And I don't really think there's too much self-reflection. And, you talked about obsessionality. I think there's more an obsession about how can I get better? Even when they're already Tiger rebuilt a swing with Hank Haney, and he was already the best in the world, right? So why do you do that? There's an obsession to being better. So I've always been a little surprised that, you know, there might be some bravado you see in the media or what have you, but really when you're sitting with that person, they didn't get to be number one by doing this. They got to be number one by really thinking about it. And one last thing that's really important. So I've been fascinated with, of course, the mind. And if you look at great discoveries are not done by the logical brain. It's not some algorithmic computation that made Einstein see E equals MC squared. It was some flash of brilliance. Oh, energy is related to matter. Okay. Or in inorganic chemistry, the foundation is the benzene ring, and no one could figure it out. And Kekukale, in a dream, he saw snakes going through a ring. The next day, we have the foundations of chemistry. So when you tap into the intuitive, creative mind, you tap into a much deeper reservoir than just being linear all the time. And I think that when you start to see the shot or do things like this, it brings other things into play. That's why we're not a robot. That's the edge we have over artificial intelligence, which is all computational, right? So, I know I got a little off topic there.
No, I love your sidebars are gold. I mean, you might have triggered me when you said organic chemistry. That takes me back, but we got through it. But you also
You were
highlight a really,
traumatized.
I was organic chem 1 and 2, but we got it done. You bring up another great point, though, in that this creative brilliance, these downloads, this insight, it requires a rest, a playful element. It's not the grinding all of the time that gets us to the goal. It's the rest and time away that allows all of the knowledge acquisition to integrate so our subconscious mind can do the dot connecting behind the scenes or under the hood, if you will. So for those of you listening, look, it's a superpower to be able to go, to grind, to work relentlessly. But at some point, if there's not a complementary part of rest, of play, you're grinding into nothingness. You burn out, and we go into that conversation we had earlier. You run yourself into the ground.
Yeah, 100%. So you have to juxtapose those two things. And what people don't understand, I always like to say we're the noisiest passenger of our own ship. And what I mean
Ooh,
by that is we think we know what's going on. We think we control it, but not really. Our unconscious mind is processing things all the time. That's what's manifested in dreams. So you learn, you practice the skill, and maybe you go home and you think about it, you dream about it a little bit. That is reinforcing it. So you're very right. So the guy who, pounds at the lesson, okay, let's get away from it a little bit, and that's
yeah.
why sometimes when you don't play for a week, you come back and wow, I'm playing good. How did that happen? But there was probably some process that was underneath conscious awareness.
Sometimes I put myself in timeout during a practice session, a 5 minute cool off period. Hey, take a break. And then everything seems to click 10 times easier when I come back.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, here's an interesting note. I don't know how much depth we want to go into this, but you kicked off the conversation with your own passion and fascination with mind states and consciousness. And we're talking here about the creative downloads that come from stepping away. I keep coming back to altered states of consciousness, whether that's assisted altered states of consciousness, drugs or otherwise, or whether it's through our own breath work or other practices. How have you seen or observed altered states of consciousness being fruitful and productive and allowing us to further achieve self-awareness and improve performance in our respective crafts?
Yeah, so I would like to say that altered states of consciousness, um, it's a little bit of a misnomer. So when we think, oh, guy took LSD, it's an altered state of consciousness. Oh, he's in the zone, he's unconscious, maybe altered state of consciousness. But really it's a continuum. So
Mm-hmm.
I know if I get a chance, like this morning, to go to the gym, and I walk in and I come to work and I look at my beautiful office window and I'm like paying attention, and my consciousness is quite open. Okay. It puts me in
Mm-hmm.
a good space to do this and see my other clients today. If I, let's say, got the ticket coming in, the hypothetical example, then I'm anxious and I'm not happy and I'm not even seeing anything out here. I'm just, burrowing in here. Darn it, how did I do that? So, and ironically, and I was always disappointed about this, in psychiatry and medical training, we never use the word consciousness. But isn't that what it's about in life?
Mm.
So whether it's on the golf course and being open, or just in daily life. Um, I see sometimes a lot of patients in a day. I have to take a break, and I just
Mm-hmm.
might, let's just look out there. Let's just let it go. Let's bring it back to baseline. And most people don't think like that. I mean, heck, this is what I do for a living, but they're not really aware that their consciousness changes,
Mm-hmm.
throughout the day. Now, I know you do hypnosis. So what's hypnosis? It's a focused state of concentration, right? For people that don't do it, yeah, it's an altered state, but it's a bit of a continuum, right? So
Hmm.
how do we bring you over there? One last thing, and before I
Yeah.
give it back to you, is in the Finding Your Zone book, we talk about this example of a cerebral professor who defines everything by what he thinks. And then
Mhm.
we contrast it with a Italian, person who's everything about what he feels. And then the question is, are you what you think or are you what you feel? And
Okay.
it's really a trick question because you're both in neither. Meaning, if you can see your thoughts separate from yourself. So people that have severe OCD, obsessive compulsive, they know that it's neurotic. They know they shouldn't wash their hands 100 times. And we get them to see that piece separate from themselves, and in meditation, what do you learn? To let the emotion, you sit with it, you let it pass, you let it be separate. So then you learn the sense of the observer, the sense of
Hmm.
self. And
Yeah.
if you can do that, you'll manage negative thoughts better, you'll manage negative emotions better.
I love that. And for those of you listening, I can't help but point out every one, it seems, of the phenomenal guests that joins me in some way, shape, or form brings meditation to the conversation. There's so much benefit, value, power in cultivating a practice to go within, to learn to separate yourself, to learn to sit with, manage, and navigate emotions. So thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure. I
There
only
are
have a few more minutes, Paul.
I know. I was just going to say, I know we're pressed for time. There's 15 million things I want to ask you, but I'll get you out of here on this and we'll just do it again. I want you to imagine this. There is a billboard centrally located in the middle of a golf course, visible from all 18 holes. And you have an opportunity to stamp your final takeaway from this conversation on that billboard. What are you putting on that billboard?
I'm I mean, one of the things it makes me think of is telling the golfer who's, perturbating, obsessing over a 5-foot putt is 6 billion people don't care. Hit the putt, have some fun. Okay. Don't take it too seriously. It's a game, it's a sport. It should be for fun. If you can connect to that piece, you'll always play better.
Fantastic. Now, Dr. Lardon, you are the author of Mastering Golf's Mental Game, the author of Finding Your Zone, 10 Core Lessons for Achieving Peak Performance in Sports and Life. Where can our audience go to purchase those books as well as to learn more about you?
Amazon, like everything else. But those books are ubiquitous. You can find them anywhere. The Finding Your Zone book is 10 lessons, meaning 10 athletes that I've worked with, that some concept was illustrated, and then we extrapolate that for the salesperson, for the teacher, for the regular person in life.
Mm,
So that's a more general book. The golf book came out of uh, I couldn't work with everybody. So I thought it's more of a workbook. It's like a real book that you
mm.
get in there. You take a test. It tells you your motivation is not pure. This is, and that one is something that if you want to be a serious golfer, it talks about exactly what we do on tour when you're under stress, when the bad thought comes, how do you deal with it? So that's a more, hands-on for the guy that wants to shoot par.
Love it. And I'll put all of those in the show notes below so they're easy links to access. Dr. Lardon, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Paul. Thank you, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. And for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in to another phenomenal, insightful conversation. There is so much opportunity for you to apply what you've learned here today to significantly improve your life, both on and off the court. So go back, re-listen, take notes, and apply what it is you have learned. And if you haven't done so already, it takes 30 seconds to leave a genuine rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to today's conversation. Thank you again for listening. Have a great rest of your day. Hit them straight this weekend, and we'll catch you in the next episode.